Hello, I'm Brent Zeller, founder and creator of Effortless Tennis. Effortless Tennis is a physically and psychologically healthier way to live, learn, and play that maximizes participation and potential while minimizing mediocrity and failure. Effortless is the adjective used by world-class athletes to describe how it feels when they achieve peak performance. This is the first in a series of videos. It covers my background and experience as a player, teacher, and coach. The information in this video is essential for understanding why I developed an alternative to the competitive learning model that currently dominates education. To some, the effortless approach seems radical or unrealistic, but to me it's just simple logic and common sense. Why do we throw people into competition before they have any skills? Hopefully, you'll find that there's something more going on here with the Effortless Tennis program than just learning the wonderful sport of tennis. Perhaps, possibly, the evolution of consciousness? Have fun. Let me give you my background, because with what I'm proposing, it's good to know what I've done in the past to come to this point. And so basically I've played sports all my life, starting at 6 or 7, probably doing organized competitive sports since I was 7. Played all, baseball, basketball. My mom was a star in the 1930s on her high school team, so I guess that's where I got some of my coordination. But the other thing, the main reason I feel like I have the coordination, is that I actually practiced. Whether it was baseball or basketball, we had a hoop in the driveway, and so I would just go out there and practice and dribble and shoot for hours, And then I got into baseball, and my dad would take me out, and I was the pitcher, and so practiced a lot, and so I got good at that. Then I took up tennis at age 14, after I'd done these other sports to a decent level. And when I got to tennis, there was something different there. It was more challenging. Like I say, when you have a team sport, if you're having a bad day, they just take you out and put somebody else in. But with tennis, there's no substitution, so you have to figure it out. And that can be very frustrating and annoying. And so, but that doesn't help you figure it out. Sometimes you like to have somebody to blame something on, but with tennis, you don't have anybody. it's all you. And so got into tennis and started taking lessons and got pretty good. I was like the number 2 guy on my high school team, where the number 1 guy was one of the top couple players in the state of Pennsylvania. So we had a strong team, but my tennis got me into the College of William and Mary. My grades were pretty good, but it was the tennis that got me in, and I played there my freshman year, and was on the varsity team playing like number 5 or 6. It's a Division I school, and have played lots of tournaments in high school, lots of tournaments after college. So I have lots of experience in the competitive system. But when I started teaching tennis in 1974, shortly after that, my first real teaching job was in Annapolis, Maryland in 1977. There we'd have these social round robin type things where you'd eat and drink and play a little tennis and yuck it up with everybody. But what I started noticing was that people's personalities changed dramatically from when they were at the bar eating and drinking to when they got on the court. They'd either become, usually the men would become very aggressive and get really upset with themselves and hit the ball hard, and then some men would be more wallflowers, and the women, especially at that time in the 70s, they were much more wallflowers out on the court. That's obviously changed a lot in the last 50 years. But it's why are these people's personalities changing so much just between socializing and playing tennis? And that's when I first started understanding that we were throwing people into competition before they had any skills. I just kept seeing that more and more. People would, even when they were just taking lessons or hitting with each other, they'd play much better, and then all of a sudden they get into competition and they'd tighten up. So just over the years I started saying, well, okay, this is strange. Maybe what we need to do is remove all competition from the learning process and teach the skills, and not just the physical skills, but the mental and emotional skills. So that's what I started doing. And then in 1992, I read this great book by Alfie Kohn called The Case Against Competition. Brilliant work where he compiled all kinds of studies that showed basically a competitive learning system produced worse results than a cooperative system. So that's that end of that year, I just booted all the competition out of the program. So since then, it's been completely non-competitive. So 32 years of non-competitive learning. And so again, it's not no competition. Competition is the high level of any activity, sport, subject. It's not something for beginners or people who do not have their fundamental skills together. What I'm saying is just logic, simple logic. Why would you throw people into competition before they can demonstrate competence in the fundamental skills? Yet that is how our system works. If you ask any coach or player, everybody says, what's the difference between being good and great? And it's mental. It's the psychological stuff. For some reason, people think that you get that, oh, well, throw you into competition and you'll learn all that psychological stuff there. Again, that does not make sense. Here, with no competition in this program, you're going to get to learn those psychological skills. You know, at least up to the point where you can hit the ball and do all this stuff with other people, because then if you have some psychological basics, then you can go out there and play competitively and do okay with it. Big thing that people say, oh, I don't mind losing as long as I play well. Well, most of the time when people lose, they aren't playing well. They're beating themselves. And so it's like, oh, well, that person doesn't have it. It's like, no, that person doesn't have the fundamental skills necessary to succeed. So yeah, there's no competition here. You're gonna learn the skills, and then, like I said, you were saying about wanting to beat your husband. Well, if you get your skills together, not just the physical skills, but also the mental and emotional skills, you can do that. But it'll be most likely that he disintegrates because you are keeping the ball in play and just staying cool, calm, and collected, and he starts missing, and that's usually what happens with people. I played a match, my last match as a competitive tennis player was when I got here in 1985. I arrived early 1985, and they had this tournament. It used to be called the Trans-America Open. It was the men's professional tour stop in San Francisco. So they had pre-qualifying and qualifying to get into the main draw. So I went to the pre-qualifying, won a couple of rounds, and then this guy came out and I was just getting blown off the court. This guy was just, if I didn't hit a good shot, it was like, point was over. I mean, this was happening point after point after point. I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? What's the story here? From the mental training I had done with this fellow Jim Lair, who was like the top sports psychologist in tennis in the mid 80s, or 83, I worked with him. But learned, okay, you got to get every ball back in play. When you're losing that badly, you just have to go, okay, I just need to put the ball back over the court. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but make sure that I don't beat myself at this point. what happened, I mean, he won the first set like 6-1 and was probably up 4-1 or something like that in the second set. And I started employing this strategy. And all of a sudden he missed one easy shot, and you could see it annoyed him. And then he missed another and another. All of a sudden he was freaking out because he had already been, you know, telling the people on the sidelines that this guy sucked and that, you know, what was he doing here? And he just completely unraveled, and I started playing better and ended up beating him in 3 sets. So it turned out this guy was one of the top juniors in Northern California, and at some point was ranked #1 in Northern California in the men's open division, and played at Berkeley. And so, you know, really good player, but he was known as a head case. So I got to his head. So that's where I saw how important the mental side is. You know, you take 2 beginners and you have them keep score. Neither of them have any skill. One of them is still going to, at the end of it, say, I'm the winner. I'm the winner, you know. Oh, look at me, I'm the winner. And mom and dad, oh, you won, oh, so good. Yeah, so just started really sensing that there were issues here. And again, it's not competition per se, but getting into the competition before you have all the skills. And the competitive system, which we've all grown up in, is throwing us into competition and thinking that's the best way to teach people. And to me, it's just really that's not how it should be. You know, just seeing this for 50 years. Yes.
Don't you think, though, that for some people whose competitive nature might be organized in a specific way, that's the motivating factor to have them figure out how to best perform?
It could be, but again, you know, people say, oh, well, I'm highly competitive. You know, I'm a really competitive person. And to me, that's part of how the system indoctrinates us. It's not that you're competitive, it's that you want to do well. You have a desire to do well and be better at what you're doing. That's not competitive. That we conflate the competitive with that desire. And they are distinct. I mean, they could overlap, but we've been being programmed this way for, you know, decades and decades and hundreds of years. This is a whole new paradigm, basically, is what I'm talking about here. And what I've seen with these 50 years is that, yeah, you remove competition from the program until you can demonstrate competence in the skills. And then once you demonstrate competence in the skills, then competition is appropriate. And just the more I looked at it, it's like, wow, everything we do is based on this competitive mentality or this competitive educational model. The competitive system is basically the school of hard knocks, trial by fire theory of learning. I use the baby analogy as you take a newborn and you throw it into the deep end of the pool, and if it doesn't swim to the side, you go, next, and go on to, I mean, that's because I'm seeing so much trauma in people, in their learning. Yeah, you know, I mean, in the end of 1992 is when I recognized, I mean, I had been de-emphasizing competition. One of the places, 1988 to 91, I worked with the Drake High tennis team, and my first year, I just worked with them for the last month. They were 0-14. The second year, I started working with them pretty regularly. They ended up 1-13, and this was a whole group of kids in the same grade, so now they were sophomores. And at their banquet at the end of the season, I said, hey, you know, 2 more years, you guys can win the county championship. And they were like, are you nuts? We just ended up 1-13. I was like, yeah, but you know, just stay with this and you'll see. Fortunately, at that time, they bought into the whole program, and the next year they were 7-7. And then their senior year, they were 14-0 and beat Redwood, who had won the county championship like 14, 15 years in a row. And this was all de-emphasizing the competition and emphasizing skill development, physical, mental, and emotional skill development. And so that's when I saw, and then I also saw a lot of the negatives of the competition. I mean, I had played high-level competitive tennis for many years, but being in that situation, first off, the competition between the different players on the team and how they would, beat each other up and try to get over on them psychologically. And then, like with Redwood, they had just a the superior attitude. It's like, oh, this is like 40 years ago almost. Drake, it was Drake at the time. It's like, oh, those guys are out in the boonies, they can't beat us. But the Drake team had more mental skills, and it wasn't pretty. It was pretty ugly, actually, but they actually went undefeated and won the championship. So that's when I thought, okay, but that's when I really started decreasing because it's like, oh, don't you want to do that more and show everybody how, powerful this? No, I proved it. Right there it is. I don't need to do more on that. So anyway, I booted all the competition out in the end of 1992. That young woman over there that's teaching, she's 40 now. I started working with her when she was 9. And so we worked until even into early college. She went up to Santa Rosa, but she won the county championship a couple times. Singles. Never did any competition in any of our lessons. We do like 3 lessons a week, and she's just an amazing player. And so I saw it work in competition, but that wasn't the goal. My goal is to help everybody get out here and to be relaxed. The big problem with the competitive system is that it makes each generation be more competitive than the previous one. And that's what we really have to understand. I'm working with these students over at Dominican, and they range from probably like 20 to some of the ones in the graduate program are late 20s, something like that. But again, they all have that tension from all the striving they've done to just get where they are so far. And so just already this is the 3rd week that we've done it, they're all again more relaxed. So it just gets programmed in generation after generation, and we have to stop that, because again, that's why I believe the system is in such trouble, is because the human being can't absorb that much stress and tension on a continuous basis. That we need to be more relaxed, and in a society that's making us go more, and each generation having to be more competitive, where does that end? And I think that's where we see aberrant behavior really happening, because these people are just we're not wired to be that tense and stressed and occupied. We need that time to relax. And so that's the thing, that the real problem is that if each generation didn't have to be more competitive, then it would probably work. But the fact that it does, because we have to show that we're better and all that stuff, and we're better than the previous, or better than our parents, whatever, that's where the real issue comes in here. So here we're working on this to get this to be, oh yeah, wait, I can be that relaxed and focused and hit a beautiful shot. And each of you have had some of those shots where it felt like you did nothing and it felt great. That's good. That's what we're going for. And again, that's the highest level. This is not a high level, lower level of consciousness. We're working to expand that consciousness.
I think it's the whole idea. I feel like the undoing the competitiveness really changes the way that I was able to learn. Because I've tried learning a lot of different sports. And so, for example, my friend had played varsity tennis in high school, and then she came out to play with me, and I had only taken like a few lessons with him. But she was like, oh, how do you hit it like that? I was like, what do you mean, how do you hit it like that? How did you hit it for 4 years in high school? But because they get thrown in without actually learning any of the fundamentals. And then they just try to make it with what they have so that they can get better, so that they can win.
I played way back when I was a teenager, and then about 15 years ago again. and I, turns out, developed a bunch of really bad habits that I didn't realize were bad habits until Brent pointed them out. Something so basic as just watch the ball as you hit it, so that he calls that tracking, right? And just doing that little thing changed my game completely, and it still changes because I forget, because I have such a built-in, he talks about the cellular memory.
Yes.
It's built into our body, so we have to change that over time.
And that doesn't happen easily.
Yeah, but when it does happen in that moment, it's a whole other experience. And I especially love how it's a collaboration of players, not competition, not trying to get the point. Like collaborating is just such a big piece. I love that.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. The cellular memory is working on the fundamentals until they just become ingrained.
Right.
Which is why I'm here for my third time in a row.
Yeah, this is my 4th time, and I think I was so not able to hit a ball in the beginning of this program. And now I can hit a ball, and it's great when I'm focused and when I am watching it and tracking it and doing all the things that he tells me to do. And it's been a life changer. It's been good.
Yeah, because again, it's the completely opposite mentality that we've been raised in. And one of the big things with the competition is that it teaches us and programs us to see others as adversaries and obstacles to our goals. And so we get that programmed into us from such a young age that it just becomes natural. And so,
There's a deprogramming process.
There's a huge deprogramming process here to understand that, wow, this actually works better. But the competitive learning system and the competitive paradigm is just dominant, but starting to show through tennis that this is possible.
I'd even say that, from a broader societal perspective, like the patriarchy, we as women, we have this ingrained desire to prove ourselves, like this proving energy, this efforting.
Oh yeah.
And that's something that I really noticed, even just in the tight lips, coming up and like, I want to try, I want to get it,
Right.
And it took me a long time to just, okay, you got to relax, exhale with the hit, and just let it flow. It doesn't have to be this, tight muscle gripping, kill the shot every stroke. So.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point, because yes, women have been really pushed to that. And, I've got to show I'm better than men. It's like, no, again, you can do that once you have the skills, right? But if you don't have the skills, it's just not going to happen. It's just going to make you uptight and angry and not having fun with it. Seeing others as obstacles to our goal is not good and doesn't help us. I grew up in the 60s. So my whole thing was peace, love, and brotherhood. And working together to make a better society so that, we could survive this crazy world. No thoughts? Besides fun?
Fine.
We've gone better.
Lots to really learn.
We can rally a bit.
What's that?
It feels good that we can rally a bit more consistently.
Right. Yeah, it's just learning that dance. So yes, we're basically through a 7-week program. I appreciate you participating, and I think you're starting to see the aspects of the competitive learning system and how they have negatively impacted our learning. Again, it's that just the simple thing of being thrown into competition without skills. I mean, that is the dominant learning model these days, and how people can see that as logical and the best way to help the most people do well is, hard to believe. And again, the thing with the competitive system is that it only creates a small amount of excellence. There's like 10% really that excel in a competitive system, and you got some percentage that do pretty well and then some that do okay, but a majority, at least 60%, are in the mediocre to abject failure category. It's not a viable system, and that's what I'm trying to show here, and what I feel I am showing. Tennis is the vehicle to see that there is a healthier, physically and psychologically healthier way to learn, and that yes, if you at some point have those basic skills together, then you can compete, but you want to have those skills together before competing, right? It doesn't make sense. And the whole thing, the physical skills are one aspect of it, but the big aspect is the psychological skills. So here we are throwing people into competition physically pretty much unprepared, and psychologically definitely unprepared, because the ego and the self-esteem are on the line. And so we throw them out there, and then we bring in therapists and sports psychologists to undo the harm. And so it's good for their business, but to me, if we actually teach the psychological skills as we are learning the sport, and like I've told you before this time, when you're out there learning how to do the mechanics a certain way and to do your footwork a certain way, and you're just hitting, there's going to be a lot of failure in that. And so then that brings up all those past things about desire to do well and then not doing well, and how do you react to that, and do you get angry and upset, or do you give up, or whatever, and so in learning the sport, you develop those psychological skills to deal with that without the excess pressure of the competition, the us versus the them. My ego and my self-esteem are on the line. We learn all that, how to deal with that, before we start competing. And then you go in there and it's like, oh yeah, I have some tools to work with this, because just learning the sport made me have to deal with all those things. So that's where the big problem comes in, and then there's the whole thing about performance anxiety. We feel that, maybe we just sort of assume that performance anxiety is just a natural part of the learning process. And it's only a natural part of the competitive learning process, because as soon as we have a failure, that brings up performance anxiety, and then each one that comes along deepens that performance anxiety. And so how do we undo that? And so that's what we do here in the non-competitive system, is we learn to undo that performance anxiety, because it's like, oh yeah, right, I'm just learning. See, if you have to win, then that's a whole different mode. And so it's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to learn. Yeah, oh yeah, I screwed up, and you're going to screw up a lot of times, and that's okay. So that's the issue there. What I've seen, what we've been working on for these 7 weeks are what I call the foundation strokes, the simplest, most important mechanics that, if you get them programmed into your cellular memory, they will be there for the rest of your life. Because as I've said many times, you can't think and play great tennis or do anything really at a high level if you are trying to think about it. Right now, you're thinking about it. We sort of have to think about it to the point where we don't have to think about it, right? So there are other strokes, but you want to get those foundation strokes in, because those are what I've determined from all this experience as the simplest, most basic form. And because of cellular memory and its power in learning, we have the ability to program whatever we want. And so that's where being very specific on those mechanics, right? And then also programming the tracking and our focus. We have to program all that stuff beforehand. And so that's what we're doing here. And you've all made great progress. I talk about the onion and how each of these things are like an onion with the many layers. You're all much more relaxed than when you got here. So you peeled off some layers of that onion, but there are many layers to go on that. Same thing with the concentration. Much more focused overall than before. And so, some of those layers have come off. And then the tracking of the ball. You're getting better at that, but you have to stay, you peel off those layers and it keeps getting better, but it just takes time and there's no rush to it. So, yeah, I mean, do you feel like you've made progress on those issues? Yeah. And then the last thing I'll say is just that one of the things I've learned, and I said this during the class, but just to reiterate it, we can't play our best in competition. That is a fallacy of the competitive system. How can you play your best when the person on the other side of the net or the other team or whatever sport is doing everything in their power to prevent you from playing your best? You can't. But we've always been told, oh, that's where you get to play your best. No, that's not where you play your best. So remember, the whole process here is that there's this long learning phase with no competition. And then you can have the competitive phase where competition is the advanced aspect of the process, not what for beginners or people who don't have their skills together. So it's getting that together and then doing the competition. But yeah, we can't play our best. So you have the competitive phase. That's a phase you can go through, but it's in this paradigm, it's an optional phase. You don't have to compete ever. I know that sounds like anathema to many people, but it's just, you don't have to compete. You can come out here and play and have just a great time and never keep score and just enjoy it. At some point you may say, okay, now I'm competent, like you were saying with your husband. He got nervous playing and serving. So if that nervousness comes up, you're not ready for competition, and that's okay. Right? We don't have to do all this competition, but just understanding that it's the learning process, and that by removing competition from the process, it makes learning much more fun and easier, and it takes away that stress, because you know how easily you tighten up, and it's like, yeah, that's the previous competitive learning system. So we can slowly get that out of the way, because again, at high level performance, you have to be very relaxed, and if you're not, then you're in trouble. So yeah, that's basically what I had to say, and I really appreciate you all being here, and most of you will be coming back for the next session, and that'll be really great. And so we just keep building on the process and having fun with it, and seeing ourselves get better. That's the fun part. It's not a goal of getting somewhere. It's just, oh wait, yeah, I'm getting better. I feel better at this. And so since this is a high skill, fine motor coordination activity that you're asking yourselves to participate in, it's great. You just slowly get better. And the good news is there's like this initial learning hump that you have to get over. And then once you get over that hump, which that hump has a lot to do with undoing old physical and psychological habits. And then you get over that hump, and then it's significantly easier, although still challenging, because it's a challenging sport. So anyway, thank you all, and we will see you Thursday, and then some of you Thursday, and we'll go from there. I trust that what has been presented here gives a clear understanding of the absurdity of throwing people into competition unprepared. Having students be competent in the fundamentals before competing is imperative for success. Most importantly, the psychological fundamentals. The premature introduction of competition makes people uptight, undermines development, and makes achieving our potential impossible. There needs to be a foundational shift in education, and the Effortless Tennis learning model provides the blueprint for that paradigm shift. Thanks for watching.